Hello, I'm Owen Gotimer, the community manager at TechWell. I'm joined today by Ryan Kenney, a senior consultant at Coveros. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Owen.
Of course. So today, Ryan and I are going to be chatting about a principle in the Agile Manifesto. So the principle reads, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. So do you want to explain to the viewers what this Agile Manifesto principle means?
Sure. So simplicity is more about what you don't have to implement versus what you do. So there's something to be said about following requirements and implementing just the features that are outlined by those requirements. One thing that people tend to do is try to implement more. Well, I might want to develop this framework so that if we ever want to do X, Y, and Z crazy thing, it'll be easier. And you end up doing all this extra work, writing all this extra code, and for what? There's a principle called YAGNI, which stands for you ain't gonna need it. So it's true more often than not. When I first started development, I found it hard to believe. I was like, well, no, I'm very certain we're going to need this tool that'll only take me a day to make, and didn't need it.
Right.
So that's simplicity in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, definitely. So we're actually working on a project together right now. Working on migrating a website from one hosting provider to another. And there are some requirements that we've kind of talked about possibly needing down the road. And in those conversations, you've always come back to, yeah, but what do we need to take care of now?
Right.
And how important, why is that integral to being agile?
Well, so another term, so there's analysis paralysis, where you think about all the things you could necessarily need, and you end up designing this overly complicated system, and you never actually get off the ground because you keep trying, it's the what if monster, is what they call it in the military, is you try to figure out every possible thing and plan for it. And the answer is just plan for the things you know, and then adapt to change. That's what Agile is all about. Build the simplest solution that meets the requirements you have now. And if there's a new requirement, you can, because you're being agile and because you're able to adapt to change, adapt to it then.
Right. So
you save yourself the trouble of not having to implement a bunch of things you potentially wouldn't have used, saving time.
Right. So you talk about that, you have this idea where people think that they need things done, and then you ultimately don't end up using them. Do you have any, examples of things, or do you have any things that you can see inside of an organization where they kind of don't follow this agile principle and it's kind of holding them back from really being agile?
So there's certainly the instance I mentioned before is an example of it happening. Now, trying to identify that your solution isn't simple is a little tricky because it all depends on what the overall picture is and what you're trying to implement. If something sounds complicated, it probably is. If you have requirements that sound like, handle this edge case, or be able to do this thing that may or may not happen, or even if it does happen, it doesn't happen quite a bit, then your product isn't already super robust in handling the majority of your use cases, then you're probably overcomplicating. A good place to start is always is focus on what's going to bring you the most value. The next thing you work on should be the next highest priority for what brings the most value to your customers and nothing else.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard that, the most valuable, I think they call it the MVP.
Yes.
It's the most valuable, the most valuable product that you're going to be able to deliver. You want the least barrier driven, most, I don't know the exact wording they use. It's basically like the thing that's going to give you the most for the least amount of effort is what you want to, that's how you want to prioritize your agile backlog and your sprints and whatnot.
Exactly. You want the minimum viable product, so the least that gets you the most. Right. You don't want to do the reverse and get the maximum viable product, which is everything with all the bells and whistles, but it's going to take you forever to implement. And then by the time you implement it, the customer's like, well, no, that's not what I asked for. The whole point in agility being small increments is you can adjust to change, which is maybe the thing you thought you needed before, you don't need. Again, going back to you ain't going to need it. There will be things where you think you need it, and there was nothing you could have done. There was no way you could have known. You implement a feature, turns out you didn't need it. So the less time you spend on these features that you potentially are going to have to throw out, the better.